Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And today, I am proud to bring you my 63rd podcast and number 4 in Season 3. It's great having you join me for today's conversation. You know, when COVID crippled school music programs, one area that was totally devastated was the school travel world. What were regular school activities, such as spring band trips, were brought to a screeching halt. But now that restrictions are lifted and schools have been back in session, the travel world has rebounded on a near-record pace. Today you'll hear a conversation I recently had with Tom Merrill. I've known Tom for over 40 years. I met him first when he was a volunteer at the Bands of America Summer Workshop in Whitewater, Wisconsin. Tom spent a decade as a school band director and has spent the past 20 years in the band festival and travel business. Today, Tom is a travel consultant with Bob Rogers Travel. I saw Tom recently when we were both at the Kansas Music Educators Conference in Wichita. I was there to talk about music advocacy, and Tom was making a presentation about the do's and don'ts when you plan on traveling with your group. We ended up having breakfast together, and as we were talking, it occurred to me that this would be some great information to provide you via this podcast. So you'll hear Tom's story and some great tips if you plan on taking your ensemble on a trip. Right after this word from one of my sponsors, Hal Leonard, publisher of the Essential Elements Method for Band.
Today's podcast is made possible through the support of Hal Leonard, publisher of the Essential Elements Method for Band and the Essential Elements interactive website that is free for Essential Elements users. Essential Elements Interactive, or EEI, is a state-of-the-art, cloud-based support program that is constantly evolving to provide you and your students with more information and resources to help them learn and have fun while doing so. To learn more about EEI, visit EssentialElementsInteractive.com.
Well, this next young man is, I guess he's not a young man anymore. He was when I first met him. This is like 30-some years ago. We were working together at a Bands of America event in Whitewater, Wisconsin, and he was one of the volunteers, and he stood out because he had such a great attitude and level of energy, and we've kind of remained in contact over the years, and I just reconnected with him recently at the Kansas Music Educators Convention in Wichita, where he was there and I was there. And I said, I got to get you on the podcast. And he said, well, you let me know when, and I'll be there. And guess what? This is when. So I want to welcome my good friend, Tom Merrill. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlie. It's so exciting to be here. I'm thrilled that you asked. You know, I look at the list of people that you've had on this thing and kind of trying to figure out how I fit in here. But I so appreciate the chance to talk with you about this. And it's great to see you again.
Well, thank you. This is important stuff, you know, because this is one of those things that we kind of push to the back burner a lot in band directing and teaching and orchestra directing, choir directing, whatever. And that is like, you know, group travel. And it's not glamorous. It's not artsy, but it's important. It's something that you know, keeps kids in the program. It keeps parents involved. There's a lot of ancillary benefits to doing this, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, but it's great to have you joining the podcast, man. We got a lot to cover. And I want to pick your brain on, for our listeners on some of those do's and don'ts as they might consider traveling. But before that, let's let everyone know where you grew up and how music came into Tom's life.
Sure thing. So I was born in South Dakota, but grew up in a little town in northern Iowa called Algona, a town of about 6,000 or 7,000 people. But a very strong community support for music in particular. They've had a band festival that happens every October that I think has been going, golly, I think it's like 50 or 60 years running now. It's just a huge thing. Brings lots of marching bands to town. When I was in high school, we actually started a field show competition aspect of that, and that's still going. But just a small town, but always had great musical support. And I started. I started on clarinet. They gave us instruments like going into the summer between our 4th and 5th grade year. I picked clarinet because my best friend at the time was playing clarinet, so that was the motivation for that. It was a wonderful program to grow up in. My middle school band director, his name was Russell Guster. He was an old Navy band guy, and he had actually served on the Enterprise in World War II. So, I mean, he saw action, Midway and that type of thing. He was a gruff old guy, but he loved us. And it was, I was, I was a little bit of I don't know, thorn in his side would be too harsh to describe it. But anytime you get upset at the clarinets, because, at that point, the clarinets were a quote unquote girls instrument. And I was the only boy playing clarinet. So every time he yelled at the clarinets, it was girls and Tom. So, but he was wonderful. And he always, as I got into music, he would always ask my parents, how I was doing, things like that. But then I got to high school, and we had a new director there my freshman year named John Abowd, who was there for 30 years and built an incredible program. And John actually works with us here at Bob Rogers now. So we've been able to reconnect and continue working with each other over the years. And that's been really tremendous.
What's your one takeaway from being in school bands?
Definitely do it. It really opened up. It opened up an entire life for me, really, when I look at it and reflect on it. And I wouldn't have thought that it would, at that point. But it is such a crucial part of growing up. I can't emphasize enough how much I have learned about leadership, about setting goals, about setting priorities, about doing all those things that have helped me be a successful person throughout my life.
Did your band travel?
Well, interestingly, they did not have a pattern of doing it. Some groups will travel every 2 years, every 4, that type of thing. We didn't have that until in the spring of my junior year. Our band was invited to march in the National Independence Day Parade in Washington, D.C. We were chosen to represent the entire state of Iowa, and I was drum major at the time. It was I was going into my second year doing that, and that was such a huge thing for the community and the community support that came out to support that. And I remember, being drum major, I was one of the kids who got picked to go down to the Capitol and meet the governor and, proclamations signed and all the stuff that goes with that. But the trip itself was a pivotal moment for me, and one that maybe I didn't realize at the time. But, being a small town kid, I really had never been anywhere much bigger than, say, Des Moines or Minneapolis. And suddenly here I am, the drum major, leading the band down Constitution Avenue in front of the White House. Capitol in the background, flags everywhere, that kind of thing. That is an extremely impactful moment when something like that happens. And it's funny, I'm looking at it right now. I have a photo from that day that has hung over my desk for the 20 years I've been doing this, because it reminds me, you never know who in that group, whose kid is going to be changed, whose life is going to be changed by this experience they're about to do, because that's what happened to me. Yeah. It was one of several moments, but that was definitely one of a pivotal moments that kind of led me to where I am now.
Yeah, we never realized that some of the kids in our ensembles have never been outside of the city limits or area limits of where they live. So that's really a good point. So somewhere along the way, though, you decided you were going to make music as a career. Maybe it was that time you walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, or was it another moment along the way, or a teacher, or what was it?
So there were actually several moments. Probably the first one of those was when I went to the, at the time called Marching Bands of America camp in Whitewater, Wisconsin in 1982. And that's where I went to learn how to be a drum major. And I learned from the best. I learned from George Parks. Yeah. And that was quite an experience. Once I survived the first day and was ready to go home and realized, nope, I'm sticking this out. That was another life-changing experience to kind of, it was sort of like I found my tribe, if you will, with, the students who were really enthusiastic about band. I saw things I'd never seen before. I mean, the drum corps that came in, Cavaliers and Madison Scouts and the Winter Guards and, the Marine Band and all those kind of things. It was just such an incredibly eye-opening experience. So that, and then I actually was planning to go into kind of a science and engineering route. I was, not only, being in band and theater and student government, I was also kind of into math and science, and computers were the new thing and stuff. I kind of fit every 80s high school geek label that there was all rolled into one. and I was actually going to go into engineering, and in fact got an engineering scholarship at South Dakota State University, where I was eventually going to go. But my senior year had kind of a successful fall. I actually won a couple of best drum major awards at various festivals. And so people started asking, so Tom, you're going to be a band director? And I'm like, well, I never really thought about doing that. I'd never really prepared for that. I'd never done an all-state audition. I'd done some solo ensemble things, but never even sat first part, much less first chair. And just didn't, that question really never popped up until people started asking me that. But ultimately I decided, no, I'm going to go engineering. Parents thought that's going to be a safer route to go, and that type of thing. So got started doing that. Stayed in marching band when I went to South Dakota State, which was kind of interesting because my engineering advisor looked at my schedule and he saw marching band on there and he said, you don't have time for that. And I said, yes, I do have time for that. And so got started in engineering, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to be drawing designs for the next space shuttle, and here I am doing calculus, trying to get X to approach zero, whatever that meant. And it just ended up not being what I thought it was going to be. So I switched over to music education, and at that same time was when I applied for the Bands of America swag team, which brings us to how you and I met.
Wow. It's a great story. A lot of famous music teachers along the way started in engineering. A.A. Harding was an engineer.
I didn't know that.
Jaime Voxman went to University of Iowa in 1929 to study engineering. And, he never left. I mean, he became the department chair, and he became the godfather of all music department chairs. Yeah. And how many arrangements and stuff that he wrote along the way. And, and when he wrote that Rubank clarinet book, by the way, with William Gower, who was his high school band director, here's a little trivia for you. Yeah. Jaime Voxman was in high school when he wrote that elementary Rubank method with Mr. Gower.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So you're in good company being an engineer and switching over to the dark side of music here. And so, you talked about, we met when you were on the swag team at Bands of America. How beneficial was that experience of volunteering at a national conference or festival or camp to you as you look back at that?
Oh my goodness. I learned, this is going to sound horrible, and with all apologies to all of my university professors, I learned probably as much each of those 1 weeks over those 4 or 5 summers I did that. I learned probably as much in those little bits of time spans than I did entire semesters sitting in my college courses. And again, and absolutely no disrespect meant to my teachers and professors, because they were wonderful, but there was so much, it was such an eye-opening experience. I mean, to just be around the people that were there. I mean, one of the years I distinctly remember I was assigned to to be Gene Corcoran's assistant with the top concert band. And so I watched Gene Corcoran rehearse for a week. I mean, that type of thing. Another year I was assisting Greg Bimm, same type of thing. And I'm watching these absolute masters of the craft doing their thing, and then on top of that, just getting to meet people like you and Dr. Tim and LJ Hancock, and oh my gosh, I mean, all the people that have touched my life over the past several years. And it really gave me not just meeting them, but it gave me a standard to try to emulate. When I got out into the field, I saw the great work these people were doing. It's like, that's what I want to be. I want to get to that level and be that good of an educator and that good of a conductor and teacher. That was, when you think of pivotal moments, that going to Midwest for the first time when I was in college, all those types of experiences were really just, kind of points on the map that kept me going the direction I ended up headed.
Yeah, those situations tend to take your education and puts it in a practical application setting.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I've always been amazed at when you're in college and you take private lessons, which are called applied music most of the time, right? Applied music. Mm-hmm. But yet the instructors rarely apply it. I mean, they basically are teaching you notes and rhythms, and they talk about style, but they never talk to you in historical concepts, or they never talk to you in theoretical concepts. So there's never that application. And the same thing is true in education. There are rarely situations where it becomes applying what you're learning. Student teaching is supposed to do that, but it's far from, I think, being successful, because like you said, when you're around a bunch of people and a bunch of things happen, you pick up so many things in such a short period of time. And that's pretty cool.
My professors at South Dakota State, and I have to give them a shout out on this. Jim McKinney was our director of bands, and Corliss Johnson was my clarinet professor, and Darwin Walker was my music ed professor. I had a long way to go. I really kind of went into it without the preparation that you see students have that go into music education now, or even then for that matter. So I had a lot of catching up to do, and their patience. I mean, these people had just the patience of a saint, but they saw something in me and gave me some great opportunities to excel. And that's, really what helped me get me through that period of time. Took an extra year of college, but got to it, and I credit them for having the patience to not give up on me.
Well, and South Dakota State has had a wonderful reputation. I remember back when I was in college, and I've been trying to think of the director of bands names back in the 70s at South Dakota State, but he used to come to the University of Missouri every summer and do the summer band camp. And I was kind of his assistant, and I learned so much from him, but I can't remember his name.
Was it Roger Fallman?
No, it would be before that.
Before Roger. Okay. I'm not exactly sure who that might have been.
Anyhow, that's good. So you receive your Bachelor of Music Ed from South Dakota State. What's the next step? Did you go on for your master's right away, or did you start teaching?
No, I got really good advice. They said, go and teach and figure out what you don't know, and then go get your master's. So I went out and figured out there was a lot I didn't know. But my first job was literally a blink and you miss it town in Northwest Iowa, where I was the 5 to 12 band director. And that's culture shock when you come from, being in a college with an amazing band program and doing the Bands of America stuff and being at Midwest and that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, you're really in the trenches. And that was a rough first year. Then after that year, I did move on to a slightly bigger dot on the map, where I taught grades 7 through 12, and I was there for 3 years. And my last year there, so another one of our mutual friends, Lisa Preston, would come over and work with my color guard during marching band season. I was right in the southeast corner of the state, so it was just a little ways across from Illinois for her. And she told me, that Illinois State is going to have a TA opening next year, because another one of the swag team members, Amy Johnson, was about to graduate from there. And I said, oh, okay, so it sounds interesting. So looked into that and went over and interviewed and applied and things like that, and ended up with a 2-year graduate assistantship at Illinois State, where I got a master's in conducting and clarinet performance. And probably most important, met my wife, Jennifer. Actually, we met the summer before. We were both SWAG team members. So it was kind of those, one time at band camp stories. But anyway, so went and got my master's. And Illinois State was an incredible experience. Took things to another level. And one of the things that I distinctly remember about South Dakota State was, one of the eye-opening things was, for me, was wind band literature and what that really was. I mean, not that we played fluff in high school by any means, but the real turning point was my first year as a music major. We did music for Prague, and I had never played or even heard a piece of music like that before, and that was a mind opener. So then I go to Illinois State, and the director there at the time, Stephen Steele, had a very close relationship with David Maslanka, and I got exposed to his music. And we were actually one of the first ensembles to perform Symphony No. 4. It had still a manuscript. I think it had been out for maybe 6 months to a year at that point. And those experiences were in terms of my knowledge of wind repertoire, were just life-changing. And got to know some incredible people there too, and kept working actually with the SWAG team. Kind of came back and did that summers, because it was at Illinois State at that time.
So once you finish at Illinois State, what's the next step for Tom?
Well, besides getting married, we moved out to Iowa, and I taught for a couple of years at Clinton High School, right on the Mississippi River there.
Sure. They had a good band there.
They did, actually.
It was a huge band. Because my brother-in-law was the football coach there for a while.
Really? I did
Clinton,
not know
Iowa, Jim
that.
Cox.
Oh my goodness! Wow. A huge band program, an exceptional color guard with the group, and really, my second year there, they let the color guard person and I design the drill of the show and write the music, which that was like playing in the sandbox, and really kind of taught me a lot, as well as giving me some great experience doing that. But then we decided to move to Colorado. Jennifer wanted to get her master's in flute at CU Boulder, and to be in Alan McMurray's band. And Alan's a dear friend and a wonderful mentor as well. So we moved out there. I got a job, taught for 3 years in the Boulder Valley schools. And that was great, because Alan and Rob Carnahan were there at the time, and they would come out and work with my band. And oh my goodness, that was just an absolute treat. One of my best memories was Alan had Timothy Rainish in doing the CU Honor Band. Mm-hmm. And my student teacher at the time was one of Alan's conducting students. And we were hanging out after one of the CU Wind Ensemble concerts, and Alan says to me, "Would you like me to bring Timothy Rainish out?" Because he knew I was working on Holst's first suite at the time. And we were like, yeah, that'd be great, and then I remember Matt and I going out in the parking lot going, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? But it was wonderful. I had never seen the band so respond to somebody like that. I mean, Dr. Rainish was just amazing with them. And it was one of the most fun experiences I've had, in teaching was going through that.
So what was it that said to you, okay, this ain't really the thing for me, but I still want to be involved in music, and I want to kind of do something else in a different way?
There were a lot of things. A lot of it kind of soul searching. The truth is, if we're going to look at the ugly truth here, the truth is I loved being a band director, but I'm not sure I was particularly good at it, or certainly not as good at it as I wanted to be. And we were at the point where we were ready to start a family, and just knowing my personality, the extreme type A that I am, and what it was going to take to get things to the level that I knew I was going to be happy with, it probably wasn't going to happen, or it was going to be very, very costly, and I've got amazing respect. I mean, you've had people like Don Stinson and Greg Bim on, and, there's my good friend, John Miller out in Utah with American Fork, who, the people who can have those amazing programs and balanced family life, I have the utmost respect for them, because I don't know how you do it, I was afraid that was not going to be me. And so I honestly had no idea what I was going to do. What do you do with this skill set, and a master's degree and not go be a band director? And I literally, started talking to, I guess they called them headhunters at the time, because I figured, okay, I've got to find some kind of corporate job or something, to keep going here. And I was at the Colorado Music Ed Association conference. This would be January 2000. And I'd been working at, our band had just done a trip to Orlando the spring before. And I'd worked with a company called New Horizons Tour and Travel. And their company owner, Kathy Letarte, had been the person who put the tours together. And we'd become very good friends, through a couple of tours that we did. So I'm at CMEA and I walk up to the New Horizons booth, and the person who's there is someone who's actually based in Florida. She was kind of given Colorado by default because there were about 4 clients out there at the time, me being one of them. And I said to her, Brenda, just out of curiosity, how do you get started in a business like this? And she said, it's funny you should ask, because Kathy was wanting to find somebody to open up a regional office in Colorado. And my jaw pretty much hit the floor. I'm like, okay, let's talk. And so Kathy flew Jennifer and I out to Michigan, where the company was based, and we spent a weekend talking, and came home and realized, you know what? I think I can do this. I think this is going to be a good fit. And kind of what it was for me too was, I loved putting together that trip for my group, the year before. I mean, even though I didn't really do the heavy duty work, I was just involved. New Horizons was actually designing it. But I realized, I can do that once for my group every 3 or 4 years, or I can do it 40, 50, 60 times a year for 40 or 50 or 60 different groups every year for the rest of my life. And it's like, that kind of seems like a no-brainer. And it literally fell together that easily.
It's great. Well, I know you had some other stops along the way. I think you did what? Were you with Music in the Parks for a while, or?
I spent 12 years with New Horizons, which eventually became Bright Spark Travel as part of a merger. Decided I wanted to try something new at that point. And so through some connections in the industry, I actually joined Manhattan Concert Productions.
Oh,
They're
sure.
the group that does kind of the mass choir concerts at Carnegie Hall and things like that. Spent 3 years doing that, and that was incredibly rewarding. And got to kind of experience a different side of things. And then after that, again, through an industry connection, worked for 4 years at Festivals of Music and Music in the Parks. I was actually executive director of Festivals of Music for 4 years. And again, was another terrific growth experience, seeing things from a different angle. And eventually I kind of got the itch to, I was starting to miss, because when you're doing the festival work, you're just doing that piece, you're organizing the festivals, and you're getting to work with a lot of different directors, and you're getting to work with a lot of different travel companies. And I had, gotten to work with Bob Rogers Travel kind of on that side of things. And I sort of got the itch to I kind of miss putting the itineraries together. That was just something that I really enjoyed, and I liked doing more in-depth work with the directors than what I was doing. So at that point, several of the people that had actually been at New Horizons and Bright Spark had found their way over to Bob Rogers Travel, over the course of a several year period. And I mentioned to one of them, one of my good friends, I just said, hey, I'm kind of thinking about getting back into this. And he said, well, do you want me to mention to Todd that you're interested? I said, yeah, sure. And I honestly didn't think it would go anywhere. I didn't think they were looking for anybody. And Todd and Tammy called me up, and we sat down and had a chat. And next thing I knew, here I am. So
that's great.
So
well,
June
and you're an Illinois boy, so I mean, close to home, right? You're working for the company that's close to home, and they're really great people. I mean, the folks at Bob Rogers. I remember when they were just getting started. I think I was just coming to Chicago at the time, or maybe they had just started, and they've done incredible work. Yep. So, okay. So let's talk about the real reason we're talking.
Sure.
I'm a high school band or orchestra or choir teacher. Why should I take a trip with my students?
Well, we've talked about a lot of it, how it can be an incredibly eye-opening, life-changing experience for the students that are in the program. And there's so many great things it can do for your program as well. A real wise friend of mine, Greg Whitmore. He teaches music education. He's one of the band directors at CSU Fullerton, and I actually talk with his music ed classes every year. We do a Zoom meeting like this, and I talk to him about, what do you think about and how do you approach student travel? And he's very wise. He says to them, you remember, this is an expansion of your classroom. This is an extension of what you're doing there. And when you plan that travel, it gives you all sorts of opportunities to take what you're doing in the classroom and put it into real world situations. And he's absolutely right. It's a fantastic way to show the students what can be out there for them in the music field, whether it's as a performer, whether it's as, some other type of a career in the music field, or just as a consumer, when those groups go and they travel and hear a New York Phil or Chicago Symphony or go to a Broadway show, they're seeing what the possibilities are out there for them.
Okay, so I said, all right, I'm going to take a trip. I'm going to take a trip with my kids. So what's the first thing a director needs to do, obviously, besides calling Tom Merrill and saying, hey, I want to go somewhere?
Well, the first thing they really need to think about, and this is what I talk with when I talk with music ed students, and I did my presentation in Kansas, is to think about your why. And what I always say is, people tend to jump to the where first, because that's the fun part. That's the part everybody likes to talk about and think about. Like to think about what we're going to do and all those kind of things. But you really need to think of the why. And the way I have people approach it is, if you're familiar with journalism, there's kind of the 5 key questions: who, what, when, where, and why. Well, for travel planning, in my mind, it's the same key questions, but in that reverse order: why, where, when, what, and who. And you want to start with that why, because if you don't have a solid foundation of that, what's the purpose that you're doing this for? What are your goals? Those types of things. It's real easy to just jump to the where and start talking about the things you're going to do. I would have conversations with directors where, we're going to go to New York and, okay, we want to see the Statue of Liberty and we want to go to Chinatown for dinner and, we want to go to a Broadway show and this, and this, and this. And then it's kind of, oh, we need to do a performance somewhere. And, not that those other things aren't important. They are. They're part of that cultural experience that you're going to get. But you really need to flip that and start with that why and think about, what is the outcome that you want for your program? How do you want your program impacted and affected by this? Because it will. It can have long-ranging effects on your program. And that's why, as you alluded to when we started, that's why this is so important, because it can have incredible benefits for your program. So you want to make sure you're approaching it the right way.
Yeah, the benefits for the program and the community as a whole. It's interesting you mentioned the word why. My second teaching position was at Olathe North High School in Kansas. And the director before me, a really terrific young man, and the operative word there is terrific and young, he had promised his band a trip to Florida. And the band was just not ready, and he wasn't ready. And the principal had to pull the trip from the kids and the parents and put the principal in a bad situation. And I remember taking the job, and the principal said to me, you got to get this program back on track, and then we got to do something and take them somewhere. Have you ever been in a situation where a director contacts you and they're just simply not ready to take a trip with their group? And right, what are the warning signs?
Right. Well, and that is so true. You don't want to dive into something like this unless it's a thing, it's a time when the group is ready to do this. I don't know that I've seen too many instances where maybe it was a case of they weren't ready, but maybe more accurately, they were tending to bite off more than they could chew at that point. It's not necessarily that maybe the travel is the bad idea, but maybe it's the destination that's been chosen. One of the things that I talk about when I talk with music ed students is I've got an equation: big does not equal distance. And when I talk to directors, sometimes they'll say, well, it's our big trip year. And what they usually mean by that is we're going to go a long distance. We're going to fly to Orlando, or we're going to fly to New York, or whatever we're going to do. And really, you ought to think about, conceptually, what a big trip might be. You may be staying closer to home, but doing some really phenomenal things rather than spending all that time and investment just in the getting to and from. And I think what happens to some groups is they kind of get in their minds, and sometimes this happens because of what we experienced in high school. I mean, when I took my group on a trip for the first time, our first trip was to Washington, D.C., because that's what I had experienced myself. It's like, that's what I want to do. But sometimes, and again, nothing against Orlando and places like that. They're wonderful, but maybe that's not the best pick for your group, even though maybe that's what you experienced in high school. And sometimes directors get a mindset of that is sort of the end all be all. And really, there are so many great things out there to do that don't involve doing something that extensive. And so when I'm talking with a director and maybe they haven't done travel, or maybe it's been a long time since their program has traveled, I always recommend, start small. Let's do a little kind of a testing of the waters type of thing. Even an overnight trip. Let's say it's a group from Iowa. Do an overnight or a couple of nights up to somewhere like Minneapolis or down to Kansas City. I mean, there's great things to do for groups there. I've had groups in both cities recently, and start that way and kind of test the waters. See if the group has the maturity and is ready for the responsibilities that come with doing a tour, which means not just on the tour itself, but doing the fundraising and doing all the things to get to that point. There's absolutely nothing wrong with just doing a shorter trip to kind of see how it goes, and then maybe the next one you branch out a little further and a little further. And I think, it's the biggest detriment I see is just sometimes the groups that decide that it has to be New York, or it has to be Orlando, or it has to be Hawaii, or those kind of things. It really doesn't have to be any of those. It has to be what's going to best benefit your program for where it is at that particular point in time.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, that is just great advice. I remember when I was in Kansas, and about 2 hours away was the Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, and they had a bunch of various resorts and things like that. And one of the things that we did every couple of years was we would take the wind ensemble or the top concert band down to there. We'd leave school on a Friday afternoon. We'd get there and we'd bring in a really top-notch clinician, for nationally level clinician, work with the group on Friday, work with the group all day Saturday. Kids still had some time for pool and playing games and bowling alley and all that stuff, and work a little bit on Sunday and be home Sunday night. And the kids bonded. They loved the trip, and the ensemble just grew exponentially through that. And so you're right. I mean, a regional trip, well-focused, can do incredible things. And it's a great launching pad for those bigger trips down the road.
It absolutely is. And that's a perfect example of just doing something like that. You talk about the group bonding, and this is kind of an interesting thing. Cynthia Johnston Turner, probably, right? Okay. She actually did her master's thesis on this. And bless her heart, she even sent me a copy of it, and I read it. It's actually a great read. But when she was teaching up in Canada, she had noticed one year that her wind ensemble was just playing far and away better than it ever had before. And she was kind of wondering, what happened? What triggered that? And so she started talking with the kids and kind of reflecting and things like that, and was able to connect it back to the tour that they took that year. Because they spent a lot of time with their own. The Canadian groups, when they travel, they do it a lot like what our colleges do, where you perform every day a couple of times. It's almost more of like those kind of things rather than how we tend to do things, where we'll do maybe a performance or two and then the rest of the time is sightseeing. So it's very performance focused. But the kids during that tour learned to work together, learned to trust each other, because they had to. I mean, you're on a bus, you're traveling, you're doing all those things. And it carried through into their musicianship. I mean, what an incredible side benefit. And that's what helps an ensemble grow. And that's, again, one of the reasons why these travel opportunities are so important, so valuable. But, you're absolutely right. It doesn't, it's like I say, that the trips don't always have to be, roller coasters and things like that. The kids will make it fun. The time together and being in a new place and having experiences with music and together, doing the sightseeing and things. That's what makes the fun. I feel like, yes, you want to have a good balance of, you don't want it to be, all museums and all serious things. There needs to be some fun and bonding time type of things, but you don't need to feel like they have to be entertained the entire time. That time together is what's going to make it fun. And routinely, you mentioned about the workshops. A lot of times when I talk with directors afterwards and we ask, what was the favorite thing that the kids did? And a lot of times it'll be, the workshop they did at Disney, or they'll talk about working with the clinician at Vanderbilt or somewhere like that, or Vandercook University, or any of those places.
Yeah, well, there are different kinds of trips, as you kind of alluded to. I mean, some trips you go for competitions, and there are trips that are done to reward students, and then there are national events such as like Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade or Tournament of Roses Parade. So as a travel consultant, how do you approach those? Or do you approach them differently or the same? Or
Well, anytime you've got an event that's kind of a central focus, a Macy's parade, Bands of America Grand Nationals, those types of things, a bowl game, there's going to be an element of that's kind of the central focus. But really with any trip, knowing what that central focus is kind of the key issue. You want to, think about, again, what are the goals that you want for the trip? What do you want the kids to come away with? Certainly, again, if there's an event, that's obviously going to, influence a lot of the schedule and that type of thing. But basically, I think my overall approach, from the get-go with any tour is, keeping that music focus, on what our goals are and what we want the outcomes to be, and building everything else around that. I think that's what not only makes it successful, it also makes it much, much easier to go and get approval from administration, from school boards, from the parents, that type of thing, where they can see that there is some real educational value to what you're doing with this, and all this money that you're raising to, get on the bus or get on the plane and go. And I just think that keeping that is really kind of the key thing to do.
what's the ratio for parents to chaperones? I mean, chaperones to students. Is there a ratio?
Well, a lot of times your school might actually, have a number that they want you to have in mind. In my mind, my two numbers are either 1 per 8 or 1 per 12, and it's kind of silly for the reason, but it makes sense too. It breaks out into hotel rooms very nicely that way, because if you have 4 kids in a hotel room, if you're 1 to 8, you got one chaperone who's in charge of these 2 rooms, or if it's 1 to 12, they're in charge of these 3 rooms. But I think that's a good number. I think, if it gets too much higher, you tend to have a lot of people in charge, and that can be detrimental. And if it gets, lower than that, then, you might have issues with coverage and things like that. I think 1 to 8 or 1 to 12 is a nice, good number to be looking for.
I bring that up because I know from personal experiences, the parents can be the greatest asset, the greatest help ever for a director. And by the way, they can be the worst nightmare for the director and the travel consultant and all of those kinds of things. So when a group is getting ready to travel, do you ever have like a meeting with the parents and chaperones and kids right there and give them some certain instructions, or what kind of things do you tell those people? These are your to-dos and to-don'ts.
Right. Well, and actually, I was actually involved with a meeting very much like that last night, actually, with a group out in Colorado. We did a Zoom. They Zoomed me in to kind of talk about the travel part of it. And I find for the most part, I don't address a whole lot of that, but usually the directors will. But I think the key things to remind, the parents. I mean, with the kids, of course, they're going to have the school rules about don't do this, don't do that type of thing. With the parent chaperones, I think the things that are important for them to keep in mind, and certainly this is something you want to establish early on in the process, and not the week before you depart, is that number one, this is not a vacation for them. This is work. This is going to be job. Yes, there's going to be fun. There's going to be fun things that they get to do. And I always tell parents too that the absolute best way to get to know your kids as friends is to chaperone a trip with them. I mean, it's a wonderful way to get to know the kids that your own child hangs out with. But the bottom line is it's a job. It is not a vacation. And it needs to be approached that way, because if you think it's going to be an easy, relaxing time, you're probably going to be in for a surprise at some point during the course of those days out on the road. And the other thing too that is so very important is that they need to understand and respect the, for lack of a better way to put it, the chain of command. The director is in charge. Usually, with a tour, we always have what we call a tour director who is with the group, and that's an on-site person, and they're there to take care of the things like the hotel room keys and the theme park tickets or the Broadway show tickets, and make sure those things are all accounted for and ready to go. Mostly so that the director doesn't have to, and so that the parents can also focus on taking care of the kids and they're not worrying about that stuff. But they are a part of that chain of command as well. And, a lot of times those tour directors are going to have direction for you that is going to help you have a better time. They're going to have some wonderful advice for you. A lot of times the kids will really start bonding with some of those tour directors as well. And they're going to have things that you need to know, for your own safety and well-being at sometimes too. So it's very, very important for the parents to understand that it's the director and the travel company in charge, and to follow that chain of command, whenever there are issues that need to be brought up, and not to just take things into their own hands and solve those problems. Generally speaking, an on-site tour director might be able to solve a problem easier and with less stress than what a parent might try to do on their own.
Exactly. Yeah, when I traveled to the Tournament of Roses parade many years ago, I worked with Bob Markle of Super Holiday Tours, and
Bob is
been a
wonderful.
friend forever.
He is such a great guy.
Yeah, over 40 years I've known Bob, and he, he told me, Charlie, he said, you be the band director and let me worry about the details of the trip. And that was the greatest advice ever, because, I kind of just said, okay, Bob, I hired you. You got it all laid out. I trust you, go. And man, it was the smoothest thing ever, because somebody was there to take care of all the details,
100% on that philosophy. Absolutely. I mean, we have a saying in our company, you do the music, we'll do the rest. And that's what it needs to be. And that's what will make it the most successful for you. I mean, music educators, you wear so many hats, and you keep getting more hats added every year onto that hat stand in your office. Don't wear this one. This does not need to be one of those. And I mean that not only from the aspect of, when you're working with a travel planner, but, by all means, I would not even try to do this without a travel planner. And I know that sounds a bit self-serving, but it's really true. I mean, there are so many other things that your talents need to go towards, and your focus needs to be on the kids and on the music and doing great things with that, because that's what you're trained to do. And that is what you are hired to do. So I think it's important to, let that travel organizer, the travel consultant, in the planning process, and the tour director on site, let them do their job, and let them handle those things so that you can focus on the things that you're able to focus on.
Yeah. So how do directors become their own worst enemies when they're doing a trip?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think one thing, and this goes more toward the planning process, and maybe even the, going as far back as the first point, and starting with the bid process, which we always love to talk about. Another equation I have that I let the students know is value does not equal cheapest. And I think sometimes, and I know, especially now, people are trying to keep things economical because costs are just, going through the roof with fuel and things like that. But my father-in-law had a great saying. He used to say, if you settle for less than quality, you will always be disappointed. And I think that bodes well here, and sometimes, we understand that you need to, keep costs tight and make it affordable for everybody. And I think that's all very important to do. But sometimes that best value might not necessarily be the least expensive. And sometimes, especially probably more so for, I'm going to pick on them a little bit here, administrators and school boards tend to gravitate toward that bottom line number. And I think a lot of directors know that may not necessarily be the answer, and it's things like, it's mundane things like, when you see on an itinerary that dinner's included, is that dinner a 4-course steak meal? Or are you going to, Fogo de Show or something like that, or is it a $10 mall food court coupon, type of thing? I mean, they're both a dinner, but they're vastly different, and when you're looking at that Broadway show, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, looking at a Broadway show ticket, are you sitting the orchestra level, or are you bumping your head on top of the ceiling like I was when I saw Hamilton in Chicago, which was still totally worth it, but it's a lot different, and you want to know what that is, and I think it's okay to ask those deep probing questions. I think any good travel planner is going to tell you, here's what you're getting, type of thing.
Yeah,
so it's important to ask that.
It comes down to price versus cost. I mean, and it goes everything from the quality of if you're driving by bus, the quality of the coaches. Are the coaches going to break down and going to cost you 20 hours of your trip? Or are they going to be reputable when you're dealing with a company that can deal with that? Or the quality of the hotel? Or, I mean, there's so many little things that end up costing you maybe a couple of more bucks, but they make it all worthwhile. So, yeah, that's good stuff.
And those are the things that you're going to remember, both the good and the bad. So you want to make sure that it's going to be a memorable experience in a very positive way.
Yeah, to remember the positive experience. That's right.
There you go.
Yeah. So how important is timely communications between the director and the travel consultant? I mean, you need to get that feedback back. How important is that in that process?
Oh my goodness. I can't emphasize it enough. Again, going back to the presentation I do, it's a PowerPoint, and I actually have, there's a slide that I pop up, and all it says on the slide is, please read your emails. And I mean that with nothing but love. We know directors are tremendously busy people, and we try not to bother you, any more than we need to. But it really is important to have that timely communication with your travel planner, because things can evolve very, very quickly. Here's an example, and this is I don't mind bringing this out. This is a choir director I was working with, so I know they won't be listening to the podcast, but I won't mention names, no names, but it was just an interesting thing. I was working with them last year, and I would, we'd start a communication, and I would send an email, and like clockwork, I would hear back from him about 3 weeks later, and then I'd respond right away, because I'm kind of trying to encourage that, immediate response. And then it'd be another 3 weeks, and I'd get the email again, and I'd respond right away. Another 3 weeks, I'd hear back from him. And I kept thinking, your 2022 trip is going to happen in 2027 at this point, And unfortunately, what happened was, by the time we got to the point of, okay, we're ready to go, the school board nixed the trip because it was too late. And that's sad. I mean, that's really, really sad. So, it's, believe me, your travel planner is working to get things to you in a timely manner and looking out to take care of you. But it's so very important to get back to them, as quickly as you can. Again, we know, because a lot of us are former music teachers ourselves, and we know what the life is like. It's tremendously busy. I mean, right now, I think back to what I would be doing, in March, and it would be solo ensemble, and it would be, wrapping up jazz band and getting ready for state concert band festival, things like that. Sometimes I reflect back and I'm not sure, I talked about not being able to keep up the band director lifestyle, and how busy that is. And so I went into travel planning, and sometimes I think, okay, how much better was that actually? But it is so important to get back to your planner as soon as you can, because things will change and evolve. You might, if you get back to them too late, you might not be able to get that hotel that is going to keep your costs at a certain point. You may have to go to something more expensive, or the buses may not be available. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing a lot, especially now because bus companies got hit so hard with the COVID shutdown, is we're finding bus companies selling out of availability for next year already in key dates, and we're 12 months out. So this year more than ever, it's so vital to get things secured and underway early on. It's really to your best benefit and your best interest to be working closely with your travel planner and helping moving things forward, as quickly as you can.
Yeah, I got a buddy that's in the transportation business, and Columbia, Missouri, Norm Rubling. You know.
Oh, I
Norm.
remember Norm. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got.
How's he doing?
He's got MoEx. He travels people from Columbia, Missouri to St. Louis, and then he's got Doc and Norm direct the bus company. And he said the problem is we can't get drivers now,
Yep.
and so that's a whole nother issue. They just don't have enough bodies to drive the buses.
Well, what happened during the pandemic was, the bus companies all shut down because none of them were traveling with passengers. So a lot of these drivers went out and got their CDL licenses to drive freight. And they found out that they got paid more and they didn't have 50 people sitting behind them, complaining about things. And so they've stuck with that. And as a result, the bus companies are working very, very hard to recruit new drivers back into this. And it's a real challenge. I mean, there's a lot of challenges out there right now that are all, coming out of the pandemic in multiple areas of the travel industry.
So as we work to wrap this up, Tom, give me a couple of suggestions that directors should do to make sure the experience is positive for everyone.
Right. I think keeping the balance is very, very important. There's a train of thought a lot of times where we'll cram the itinerary absolutely full, and the idea is to keep them going every minute of the day so that they sleep at night and they aren't causing trouble at the hotel. And I think what can happen with that, in fact, going back to my Manhattan Concert Productions experience, we saw that. Part of that experience was they would have these mass choir rehearsals, and they'd be working with phenomenal people. I mean, people like Anton Armstrong and Z. Randall Stroop and Joe Michael Scheibe from UCLA. I mean, just phenomenal choral conductors. And these poor kids, we'd watch them in these rehearsals, and they'd be drifting off, falling to sleep. And it wasn't that the directors were boring; they were just completely worn out. Because New York is the kind of city that just wipes you out. It takes so much energy just to experience the city. And I think sometimes we do a disservice to the kids by trying to put too much into the itinerary, for that reason. They need to be able to have some breathing room to kind of, to appreciate what it is they're experiencing and not be worn out. I was guilty of it myself. When I took my band to Orlando, we'd spent 3 days in the parks and then went and tried to do a festival. And I remember getting ready to go on with my wind ensemble and seeing my French horn section taking a nap. It's like, okay, this is going to go well. We managed to pull it off okay, but I think about the cannonball I dodged with that, of all that work and all that time and effort and all the fundraising to get to that point and have it falter just because we were so exhausted. So I think balance and not feeling like you got to keep the kids over busy is a very important thing to think about when you're setting these up. I mean, you don't want free reign, but at the same time, have some balance so that they're able to appreciate what they're experiencing and be rested and ready for each day as you go.
I'm sure you got a ton of stories. You got any you can share?
Oh, goodness.
Any funny ones or
I tell
ones?
there's, I got all kinds on both, sides of that. I'm just trying to think. The neat thing, there have been so many great things that I've seen that groups have been able to experience, and in some cases I've been fortunate enough to kind of tag along and experience those too. A couple times a year I usually try to go out and do the tour director part. If there's a particular group maybe that I am working with, I don't want to call it a favorite group or anything like that. We're not supposed to have favorites. It's just like you don't have your favorite students. I don't have my favorite clients. But every now and then I would go out and be with a group, and there was a couple of times I've got a friend out in LA named Tony who runs a tour company, and he can set up opportunities. He's got people that he knows in Hollywood, and he can set up opportunities where the group will go and watch a movie and then meet one of the actors that was in that movie. And a couple of times I've done this with groups where we've gone out and done that, and we watched West Side Story, the original, the 1961 West Side Story. Well, Tony's friends with George Chakiris, who played Nardo, who won the Oscar for that. And George, he's up in his upper 80s, I think now, but sharp as a tack and a wonderful gentleman. And he would come and he would do a Q&A with the kids. And he brought his Oscar. And so he's letting these high school kids, take selfies with his 1961 Best Supporting Actor Oscar. I mean, just moments like that, are so cool and so neat to just be able to be on the periphery and witness, doing those kind of things. I've got one I'm really looking forward to this fall. Going back to talking about SDSU, my alma mater, they are going to be in the Macy's parade, and they chose us to do the planning for that. And I am so over the moon excited to be doing that, for the place where I went to college, and the Pride of the Dakotas, the band that I was in. It's those kind of things. I've really been blessed to have some absolutely wonderful experiences over the years, I feel fortunate to be able to try to create as many of those as I can.
That's great. You got any final thoughts, Tom?
Well, good news is, I'm knocking on my wooden desk here. Travel's back. It's back with a vengeance. We have had a lot of groups on the road this past month. Like I mentioned, I think just me personally, about 7 or 8 groups a week that have been out, and we're finally getting a little bit of a breather now here getting into April. We're kind of past all the spring break dates, but right now, what we're experiencing, it's sort of like, I lived in Denver for 14 years. And if you've ever flown in and out of Denver airport, it's a bumpy ride, and it's because of, that's right where the Great Plains meet the mountains. And so you've got air currents that are going different directions at different levels. And so that's why you have all these climb out bumps. And a lot of what we're experiencing right now, people are traveling, but there's some climb out bumps. We talk about the bus companies and the challenges they're having finding drivers, and hotels are a little bit understaffed still, kind of things, and things are getting better. They're definitely improving. But it's meeting a lot of patience and understanding for folks right now, just as we're getting things going. But again, the terrific news is things are going again, and the feedback that we're getting from groups is that they're having a phenomenal time out there, and they're so grateful to be back out on the road and doing this again because of, as we've said, the wonderful impact this can have on the programs and on the students' lives. So it's great to see. We are so thrilled. We certainly want it to continue and hope every day that it does. And so far, things are looking very positive and very good. So call your travel planner because we're moving again.
Tom Merrill, great to catch up with you, my friend. I know you're doing the Lord's work. They're working with kids and directors and giving them new experiences, man. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. And I hope to see you again real soon, buddy.
Charlie, thank you for having me. This was just a thrill and so much fun. And it's so great to talk with you. Thank you so much.
When it comes to group travel, Tom Merrill is a pro. Like he indicated, your travel consultant is working for you. And if you want to provide a great experience for your students, it's important that you keep the lines of communication wide open. Taking a trip is a lot of work, but it can be something that your students will remember for the rest of their life. It doesn't matter if you're going to the other side of the world or a place a few hours away. Careful planning with someone that knows what they're doing will make all the difference for your experience. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks so much for listening, and please tell your friends about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. I'll be back with more great conversations, but for now, this is Charlie Mangini saying, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.